Why is the repatriation of Net Nakasa's remains important? What was Net Nakasa's contribution to journalism in modern South Africa? Are the annual Net Nakasa Awards for courageous journalists a fitting way of honoring his legacy? What selection criteria is used to repatriate struggle heroes' remains? What time is it? It's question time. Hello and welcome to the show. My name is Mpho Tsedu. The remains of renowned anti-apartheid journalist Net Nakasa will be returned to South Africa. Arts and Culture Minister Nathi Mthethwa reported that the Supreme Court of New York has granted the government permission a few weeks ago to exhume and repatriate Nakasa's body. The reburial will take place at Heroes Acre in Chesterville, KwaZulu-Natal. Nakasa, a young, prolific journalist and a black voice who exposed the devastation of apartheid in his writings, was forced to leave South Africa on an exit visa when the apartheid government refused to grant him a passport after he was awarded a Nieman Fellowship at Harvard University. Nakasa died after falling from a building in New York in 1965. Minister Mthethwa said his department had worked with the South African consulate in the United States for the body to be returned back to South Africa. My guests today in studio are Ndate Joe Hlolwe and Spiwe Mahala. You from the Department of Arts and Culture, and of course Joe is a renowned journalist, a veteran in the field. Let me welcome both of you. Joe, perhaps before we even bring the department in, who is Net Nakasa?
Net Nakasa was a very, as you said, very prolific writer in the early 1960s in South Africa. He worked first for Ilanga in KwaZulu-Natal, then came up to Johannesburg to work for Post and Drum, and then founded a literary magazine called The Classic. He was probably the first black columnist on the Rand Daily Mail.
Okay.
So in fact, his contributions for such a young man were tremendous.
Mm-hmm. And when you look at Net Nakasa, like you said, I mean, he was prolific in the early 1960s. Would you say that as we remember him today, are we remembering him given the circumstances of 1960, or are we looking at Net Nakasa representing the journalist of today?
I think it's much more complex than that. While Net Nakasa is buried in New York, it's very easy to forget the things he stood for.
Yeah.
Net Nakasa is a symbol of what shouldn't happen in our country again, never ever again. He is a symbol of the absence of freedom of freedom of information, freedom of expression, a free press, and the fact that he had to leave his country and denounce his citizenship to be able to take up a scholarship was a huge violation of human rights. These are things that we should always remember should never ever happen again in this country.
Okay. Now the department then gets involved to ensure that Net Nakasa's remains are brought back to South Africa. Why did you do so?
Well, I think Nakasa's remains coming back has to be understood within the context of his living. That because of what he stood for a free society. He believed in in racial integration, because at the time, it was at the height of apartheid when he left, and he left not to his own liking. He was forced to leave on an exit permit,
yes,
and thus becoming a stateless person. So by bringing him back, we're reclaiming him as a child of South Africa. We also bring back his dignity as a human being who belongs to this ancestral land. Because as I said earlier, he described himself as a citizen of Norway, a stateless being, and that should never have happened.
In South Africa, you have the orders, the national orders, Twalandwe, the Boabab, and all that. In football, you have the FIFA World Player. In journalism, you have the Nieman Fellowship. Now, this young journalist was awarded this fellowship, and he opted to go for it. And like Upracho said, knowing that he's not to return back home, but to ensure that he develops his writing skills and all that. Do you, in any way, as government, look into this fellowship as that important that some people have opted for it instead of opting to remain here at home?
Well, the Nieman Fellowship is a very prestigious undertaking in the world of journalism. Any ambitious journalist would want to enroll as part of that fellowship. But as I say, Nagasa's living, he was in many ways pushed, because by the time he left, actually, a letter banning him as a journalist in South Africa had already been drafted and was waiting signature by the Minister of Justice at the time.
Yes.
So the circumstances during that time, even if Annette was not to leave for Nieman, chances are he would have left anyway. Many other journalists at the time, your Ken Tembers, your Block Motisanes, also left during that period. Of course, before Annette, Louis Ngosi had taken up the Nieman Fellowship.
Yes.
Yeah.
Now, like you've just touched on one or two journalists, You've got Ken Temba, who's in Swaziland, Todd Machikiza died in Zambia. Is there anything that you want to do as government in as far as those two are concerned?
Well, repatriation is not the only way that we can celebrate the memory of past South Africans. There are different ways in which we can do that. And one of the ways, for instance, in the case of Ken Temba, his family took it upon themselves to repatriate his remains. He's actually reburied here in South Africa.
Yeah.
But what we did, for instance, last year to celebrate the 50th anniversary of the publication of his classic short story, The Suit, and also what would have been his 90th birthday, we organized the Ken Temba Memorial Lecture, which was delivered by prominent people like Ndade Jotlolwe, Nadine Kotima, and the late Mbulelo Mzamani. And with regard to, for instance, Block Modisane, whom we mentioned earlier, we have managed to repatriate some of his documents, the letters that were exchanged between him and Langston Hughes between 1960 and 1967. And we also trying to get hold of some of the documents, including short stories, stories that were read on BBC Radio, the manuscripts. So all of those will be part of our National Archives.
All right. I want us to take a break. When we return, we'll talk about the processes that are going to follow the repatriation of Net Nakasa's body, or remains rather. This is Question Time. Please don't go away.
Is a beautiful city of contradictions.
Funerals in Ghana are colorful and flamboyant. Ghana coffins are functional coffins made by specialized carpenters. These colorful objects, which have developed out of figurative palanquins, are not only coffins but considered real works of art. Each year, festivals and durbars are held in various parts of the country to celebrate the heritage of the people.
That's Kaleidoscope, Sundays 5:30 p.m. on SABC News.
I once saw a flower blossom through 27 prison bars of yesterday's unjust flames. I felt an old woman's anticipation for the country's first open elections. And I heard the loud celebrations of that flower's historic inauguration. I was there when Unity sang of how the Springbok never held anything back. And we saw a first-time band of 11 men, Shibobo possibility throughout the land. At the foot of Africa, time remembers how truth can reconcile a people. We carved our name into space, and on the world stage, our art stood united. When we blow that vuvuzela, the whole world goes into a trance. And even in that tearful hour of the flower's separation, we are a people who see the music and hear the flowers dance. SABC, sharing 20 years of inspiration.
Welcome back. You're still watching Question Time. My guest today, Dr. Joe Hlolwe, and that is Pure Mahal from the Department of Arts and Culture. Now, Brajo, let's talk about this repatriation. You've been quite heavily involved, and perhaps one would then ask, this man died many, many years ago. Why bring him back?
Again, I still believe that it's important that he is here as a presence in our society so that we can remember the things he wrote about, the things that concerned him, and remember his writings. It's much easier to forget when somebody is miles away from here. But once the person is here, we will remember his legacy. We will go back to his writings. We will go back to his life and we will talk about them as we are talking about them now.
What is so important about his writings today?
Ned was way ahead of his time. In the early 1960s, the tone in the country was, let's tear apart this apartheid state and start rebuilding from scratch. But his voice was a voice of reason, saying, there are people on the other side. Let's talk to them. Let's find ways of reaching them, and we can find a solution. So essentially, what he was preaching at the time, non-racialism, non-sexism, etc., are things that we espouse today, so that he was way ahead of his time. So it is very important that we go back to his writings and look at the things that he was concerned about. For example, he wrote about a twilight world, people who defied apartheid, who would live together in spite of the fact that apartheid wanted them to live separately.
Actually, he was always in trouble for attending parties of, mixed races.
In fact, that's the twilight world he lived in. He was very defiant, essentially. It was his way of saying, to hell with apartheid, I'm going to live my life. And the ultimate was when he walked out and said, I am going to Harvard and to hell with my citizenship in South Africa. That's the type of angry man he was, but always the voice of reason.
And I mean, upon arrival in the US, and particularly there in Cambridge, he was not, to see or meet what he had thought, was America when he was still, in South Africa. Because, I mean, when you read through some of the writings, is that, he used to greet every black person that he met, thinking, they are brothers. And on the other hand, they were surprised. Why is he just singling? I mean, he would just single us out, and not, be so worried about other people. So South Africa's situation or environment, I guess, influenced his thinking when he got to Harvard, to try and say, as the oppressed people, perhaps they were not oppressed at the time there, let's come together.
In fact, I think he got disillusioned by American society in a number of ways, where he actually got to realize that they are in fact a duplicate of what was happening in South Africa. The apartheid was still continuing. Life was still the life of oppression for blacks.
You have made quite a lot of progress. What is going to happen in as far as the repatriation is concerned?
Well, now that we have the permission to do the reburial, to repatriate Nakasa's remains from the US, the next step is to decide on the date for reburial. So we're doing that in consultation with the Premier's office in KwaZulu-Natal, as well as the eThekwini municipality, and most importantly, the Nakasa family. Okay. So we currently in those discussions, and as soon as a decision is taken, we'll make the announcement official.
Okay. Do you make initiatives as the department? Do you approach families of, the heroes and heroines to say, we believe that it is important that the remains of your relative are brought back to South Africa? Let's put Net Nakasa aside for a while.
Well, at the moment, we do not have a legislative framework that guides decisions or with regard to repatriation. So we treat each case on its merits. Okay. In the case of Nagasa, for instance, there has been a campaign for over the past 20 years. So we took the initiative to do investigation in 2012 when we were visiting the US to go to the cemetery, to meet people there, to understand what is involved, what is necessary for us to be able to repatriate the remains.
David Sibeko, he was also a drum reporter, although he's a PAC veteran, died and buried in Gaborone, I'm just giving him as an example that don't you think it's important to also approach families of some of these heroes and, to say to them, look, it is important that we have a heroes acre, a national heroes acre for that matter, where we can, put together all these giants. And I mean, I'm not so sure with the likes of Potlako, Lebalo and AP Mda, whether they would be allowed, whether the families would still allow them to be reburied, here in South Africa.
Yeah, well, the reality is we have a huge backlog in terms of repatriating our people who perished outside the country. Yeah. But the most important thing is that the families themselves have to take the initiative, and it's important to involve the three spheres of government, that is municipality, province, and national government. Okay. But as I said earlier, reburial is not the only way we can actually honor the memory of outstanding South Africans. There are many ways in which, for instance, if you think of Alex Laguma, who is buried in Cuba, in the Heroes Acre there, it might not be appropriate to rebury him. Okay. But we can do something about it.
All right. Yeah. Hold that thought there. We'll talk about the Heroes Acre when we come back. This is Question Time. Please don't go away.
welcome to our Friday edition of A View from the House, coming to you live from Parliament. My name is Asanda Mbeche. President Jacob Zuma officially opens the National House of Traditional Leaders and calls on traditional leaders to work closely with elected public representatives.
South Africa is a much better place to live in than it was before 1994. Many of our traditional leaders can attest to that fact, having seen improvements.
A View from the House, weekdays at 2:30 on SABC News.
States President Barack Obama has expressed sadness over the shooting at a U.S. Army base in Fort Hood in Texas. A soldier opened fire on fellow service members at the military base, killing 3 people and wounding 16 others before committing suicide at the same post.
I want to just assure all of us that we are going to get to the bottom of exactly what happened. Any shooting is troubling. Obviously, this reopens the pain of what happened at Fort Hood 5 years ago.
We urge you to stay with us here on AM News on Channel 404 on DSTV with myself, Elvis Preston.
And me, Kendall Makamate.
We'll be back at the top of the hour, so do not touch that remote.
That's AM News, daily at 10 a.m. on SABC News.
Welcome back. You're still watching Question Time. My guest today is veteran journalist Ntate Joe Hlolwe and from the Department of Arts and Culture, and it is Pure Mahal. Now, let's talk about the National Heroes. I'm very passionate about this. We'll talk about the Net Nakasa Award and all that later. In Zimbabwe, for instance, you have the National Heroes Acre, right? That's where you have your who's who in the struggle. Right, your Herbert Chitepos, your Josiah Tongo Garas, your Nyagumbos, Joshua Nkomo is also there, Zia Papa Moyo, and others, right? Mm-hmm. In South Africa, are we going to see a scenario where you would develop a Heroes Acre where we'll put together all our heroes?
Well, interestingly, that has been one of the very first announcements that the Minister of Arts and Culture, Natim Tetwa, has made in his first few weeks in the office. Yeah. That his ambition is to have a National Heroes Acre where South Africans who've made exceptional contribution to society would be recognized. But also, we must note that sometimes it's not necessarily the physical repatriation, spiritual repatriation or recognition of some sort that this individual is recognized as part of our national achievers in that sense.
Americans will spend the last dollar they have in the bank to repatriate the remains of their soldiers. And somehow it also helps to heal the wounds, but not just that, but also to ensure that the history of the American struggles, whether they be justified or not, is not forgotten. That's why you find that they are very passionate about their country and very patriotic.
Mm-hmm. That's correct. That's why I'm saying, on the one hand, this is reclamation of a very important part of our history. It's also about restoring human dignity. As we said earlier, Nagasa's remains lying in a country where his family, by the way, none of his family members ever visited the cemetery. Nagasa's only sibling who actually attended the funeral in 1965, Moses, vanished shortly after the funeral, and nobody knows whatever happened to him. So this has been a constant pain to the Nagasa family, that at the moment, Nagasa's only remaining sibling, Gladys Mapumulo, is the one who actually made the request to government to say, I would like to have my brother returned to be among his people.
Okay. We must give credit to you, Brajo, and others for ensuring that Netnakasa's name does not really go down to the dustbins of history, because you have ensured that constantly people are reminded of who Netnakasa is. Then there are the awards, which controversially, the past weekend, well, let me leave it there. Whatever happened there happened. Is this a representation of what Netnakasa is to the journalism industry?
The award is given to a journalist who does outstanding work and does work that requires courage. Mm-hmm. We have seen a whole list of previous winners of the award. There are people who have been up at the front, forgetting all the dangers that they faced, whether it was emotional dangers, physical danger, etc. Mm. And they brought the story to the readers. Mm. And so we thought that would be the best way to honor Netnakasa, by having an award for courageous journalism.
Yes. And then what happened this year?
I think of all the nominations, the three judges, that's myself and Peter Sullivan, ex-editor of The Star, as well as Simpiwe Sisanti from the University of Stellenbosch. We felt unanimously that Alide Danoy, the former editor of the Cape Argus, the Cape Times, in fact, was outstanding amongst the nominees.
Okay.
And we awarded it to her.
And it wasn't a very, well, it was a popular one, but, some did not think so. Did you regret?
No, we don't regret. As I say, looking at all the nominations and looking at the work, that Alida has done, we felt she deserved it completely.
Okay. As we conclude, Mbuyisa Makubo, what's happening there?
Well, that's outside my mandate, so unfortunately I cannot comment on Mbuyisa.
Well, I know it's a hot potato, but you work for the department. I'm taking advantage of your presence here.
Yeah.
What's the progress?
Well, as I say, in terms of the desks that are handling the Mbuyisa question, it's a separate issue from what I am handling as an official responsible specifically for the Nakasa repatriation.
Okay, but what we are reading in the papers, is it true that there are plans to repatriate, or not even repatriate, to get him back home if he is the one in Canada?
Well, I cannot confirm that, unfortunately.
Okay. All right, you are a well-trained spokesperson. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. That was question time for today, and a big thank you to my guest and to you for watching the show. Our feedback, or rather your feedback, you can send it via email, questiontime@sabc.co.za, or Twitter handle @questiontime24. From me and the crew, have yourself a wonderful time. Goodbye.